The worst moment of my life began with a shattering near my shoes, and my father said to a microphone, "If my daughter doesn't hand over her company phone right now, security will escort her out." There were 112 people in that ballroom, employees impressed, my aunt, our biggest suppliers, two local. My stepmother smiled like she was watching the dessert course arrive, and my half-brother Mason, already lifting his phone to. Then my father looked me dead in the and said the part he'd been waiting years to say in public. "She's been stealing from this family." He thought he was ending my career in one sentence. He had no idea what had already been sent the second my access was cut. Everyone in that room thought I was the bitter daughter who did paperwork in the back office. None of them knew what I'd spent 18 months quietly collecting. By sunrise the next morning, the same people who watched me get humiliated would be calling my father in a panic because the one thing he'd counted on, my silence, was the one thing I'd already weaponized against. It was the company's 40th anniversary gala at the Ashbury Hotel downtown, the kind of pulled chandelier column, and waiters who never blink, no matter how ugly it gets. Our logo was projected 20 feet high across the Whitmore home and kitchen. Since I was 12, that name had meant Saturdays in warehouse dust. Inventory seats balanced on my knee. And my father barking at me, "Move faster if you want to be you." He was wearing a black tuxedo I had paid for through the executive account he wasn't supposed to use for personal expenses. I knew that because I'd approved the reimbursement myself through photographed before filing it. That night, he held the microphone with one hand and rested the other on Mason's shoulder like they were about to cut a ribbon together. Perfect. Cleaning up after the jacket, empty eyes, head of brand strategy for 11 months, which in real terms meant late arrival, expense, and a trail of half-finished ideas the rest of us had to rescue. My father's the speaker. "I've protected my daughter for a long time, his family, because I believed blood mattered. But when someone becomes unstable and starts sabotaging the company," a murmur went through. He didn't say my name at first. That was deliberate. He wanted them to themselves. Then, "Callie?" Every face turned. I can still see tiny things from that moment in unnatural. The condensation was sliding down my untouched water glass. The white rose center near table 6, one side. My cousin Tara freezing with a fork halfway to her mouth. The click, click, click of Mason's thumb locking focus on his phone. I had a dark green dress and my mother's gold bracelet. I remember looking down at that bracelet and thinking, absurdly, "Don't let your hands shake." Not in front of him. Then he gave the crowd the story he'd prepared. He said I'd been withholding records. He said I'd become vindictive after learning Mason was being promoted to president. He said there were serious discrepancies under review. He said he was heartbroken but forced to act. Heartbroken. He said it like a man announcing a tragic weather event instead of a public execution. My stepmother, Dana, lowered her eyes and dabbed the corner of one with a napkin. She'd practiced that. I'd bet my life on it. Mason took a slow sip of it and looked at me with that smug, almost bored expression he always wore when he thought consequences were for other people. Then my father said the line that made half the room lean, "Hand over your phone and badge. Right now." What nobody understood yet was that he had picked the exact one move I had prepared for. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. That disappointed him more than anything. I stood up slowly and set my cloth napkin on the table. I could feel every eye in the room scraping across my. The reporters weren't pretending it. One of them was already typing notes into her phone. When I stepped into the aisle between, my father lowered the microphone and said it privately through gritted teeth. "Don't make this ugly." I almost laughed. Ugly had started a long time before that ballroom. I pulled my company badge off my dress and laid it on the nearest table. Then I set my phone beside it. Gasps. Actual here stole from the family business, and they expect bargaining, defensiveness, pleading. Innocence performed too hard. What they don't expect is calm. My father expected me to panic because panic would make his story look true. Instead, I looked at him and said, clear enough for the front tables to hear, "You should really check your email before dessert." His face changed for half a second, just a flicker, but I saw it, and so did two people from purchasing who had spent 15 years watching him bully everyone softer than him. Security still approached. Two hotel guards in gray jackets embarrassed to be involved. One of them gave me a polite nod. Could tell something about this smelled wrong. As they escorted me to the ballroom, I heard the whisper, not one whisper, 50. A rippling, hungry sound. Stealing, unstable, promotion, records, daughter. Humiliation is loud when it happens. It has texture. It has temperature. By the time those ballroom doors closed behind me, my skin felt both burning hot and numb. But the second I hit the marble hallway outside, my smartwatch buzzed against my wrist. Then it buzzed again. And again. That was the first crack. To understand why that night hit so hard, you need to understand the role I'd been assigned in my own family since I was old enough to carry a clipboard. Mason was the story. I was the infrastructure. It was charm, possibility, image, leadership presence. I was scheduled, freight discrepancies, payroll corrections, insurance renewals, vendor negotiations, and every invisible task that keeps a company from choking on its own ego. He got applause for ideas. I got blamed for delays. I got summoned. When we were kids, my father used to bring us both to the main showroom on Saturday. Mason would wander around, pressing refrigerator buttons and flirting with receptionists. I'd be in the back with Shirley from accounting, learning how to match purchase orders to invoice because Callie's the reliable one. Reliable sounds like praise. You realize it's what people call a person they plan to use. After my mother died when I was 19, my father stopped pretending there'd ever be for softness. He remarried Dana Suddenly the family reorganized itself around him. Dana loved photos, fundraisers, church committees, and the kind of expensives that make a house look unlived in. Mason, her son from her first, though my father had legally adopted him, fit perfect into that new version of the Whitmore family. So did the narrative that I was difficult, too direct, too intense, too serious, too emotional, too controlling. You know how men can scream in meetings and still get called decisive. I could correct a shipping number and become hard to work with. By the time I was 34, the company had 5 locations, 86 employees, and 1 public face, my father. People in town loved him. He shook hands hard, remembered, sponsored Little League, quoted scripture badly at charity lunches. From the outside, he looked like a self-made patriarch who had built something worth inheriting. It was messier. My grandfather, Henry Whitmore, had built the original business out of a single appliance store and a warehouse roof. My father inherited the stage, not the foundation. He was good at expanding too fast and talking too loud, good at being bad at numbers, worse at discipline. He liked growth the way gamblers like streaks, because he assumed the feeling itself meant he was winning. I knew this because I was the one cleaning up after every bold move. When we opened the Dayton Road location, I slept on a folding chair in the manager's office 2 nights because the delivery software kept misrouting in. When the commercial account team almost lost the Hollis Builders contract over a pricing error, I spent 14 instructing and found Mason had approved the wrong template because he liked the. When payroll got delayed after a server migration, I was the one fielding tearful calls from single parents asking if their rent checks would bounce. But the version told about me, inside the family and eventually all over the company, was that I was bitter because I never got the spotlight. Even some employees believed, not the older one too much, but the newer people, the ones Mason charmed with energy drinks and buzzwords. To them, I was the woman who always had a problem, always had a question, always said no. What they didn't know was that no had been the only thing standing between Whitmore Home and a slow, expensive collapse. The first lie I uncovered wasn't even dramatic. It was a reimbursement, $480 from Chicago. Executive development. Only my father had listed himself and Mason as the attendees, and the restaurant receipt included a third person whose initials matched a consultant. Neither of them had disclosed to the board. Normally, I would have flagged it, corrected the coding, moved on. Instead, I checked the consultant's invoice history. That's how I found Mercer Growth Partners. Fancy name, empty office suite, generic website, polished PDFs. And in 11 months, Whitmore had paid Mercer Growth Partners $2,000 for brand reaping and market transition strategy. I knew every real vendor. I knew who answered after one ring, who still faxed. I knew whose invoices came in early and who always rounded freight. Mercer wasn't real in the way real vendors are real. Mercer was paperwork wearing a tie. The registered agent on the LLC filing was a man named Stephen Pike. Stephen Pike shared a condo address with me. That was the first time I realized I wasn't just dealing with favoritism. I was dealing with theft dressed up as succession planning. And once you see one rotten board in the floor, you start testing the other. Over the next 6 weeks, I found consulting invoices, event expenses, duplicate payments, backdated approvals, and one especially ugly set of transfers from a supplier rebate account into a separate operating entity. Dana had told everyone was her interiors incubator. It wasn't an incubator. It was a money drain with pretty branding and no revenue. Still, I said nothing right away. That part matters. People love to imagine revenge stories as emotional explosions, but the real power starts in silent restraint. In deciding not to who are underestimated, I started copying everything, not stealing, preserving it. Vendor emails, server logs, voicemails, meeting minutes, insurance certificate, a CH confirmation, credit memos, calendar screenshots. I took photographs when I had to, exported PDFs when I could, cross-checked dates, built timelines, named folders so cleanly a stranger could follow them half a. I kept a leather notebook in my second desk drawer. Dark blue, no label. Every time I found a discrepancy, I wrote down the amount, Who knew? And who signed? You want to know what betrayal feels like in adulthood? It's not one giant it's the horror of seeing your last name beside line items The second truth was work. My father wasn't just moving money. He was preparing to hand Mason the company by force. And he needed one signature from me to do it. 3 weeks before the gala, my father summoned me into his office at the flagship showroom on Kingston Avenue. Same office he'd had since I was a kid. Same framed photo of him shaking the governor's. Same bourbon smell, he thought. Covered breath mints. He slid a folder across the desk and said, casual as weather, board packet. Need your sign-off by 5. I opened it. It was a restructuring memo that moved operational authority, vendor approval rights, and access to discretionary capital account under a new position. President of Strategic Growth, Mason. Buried inside it were 2 backdated exhibits implying those powers had already been in effect for 90 days. I looked up and said, I'm not signing false documentation. My father leaned back. It's housekeeping. It's fraud. The room went still. He didn't explode right away. That's not his style when he thinks he can still charm you into obedience. Callie, he said, all false patience, you have a tendency to dramatize when you feel overlooked. There it was, the oldest family weapon. Don't address the evidence. Reframe the woman. I told him no again. That's when his jaw hardened. He said Mason needed authority because the company's future requires a different energy. He said I was valuable but limited. He said some people are builders and some are maintainers, and I should learn the difference. I said, I built half of what he pretends to lead. He stood up so fast his chair rolled the credenza. Nah, that's exactly the kind of ego that's become a problem. Then he gave me 48 hours. Sign the packet or he would reassign me. He thought the threat would scare me. Instead, it answered my last remaining question, whether he knew what he was doing. He did. He knew. And he was willing to ruin me publicly if that's what it took to get the paperwork past me. So I created something he would never have imagined obedient, useful daughter capable of creating. A clock. The clock started the second my badge died at the gala. I had spent the previous 9 days setting up a release file with our outside compliance hotline, 2 trustees of the family holding company, the bank relationship manager for our credit line, and 1 laborer my grandfather keep on return for emergency. I included exactly what each person to see. Not everything, just enough to force action. If my access had remained active, the file would never have been sent. If my credentials were terminated, if my remote login failed 3 times, or if I didn't manually cancel by 8 p.m., the packet went out. At 7:16, walking through the marble hallway of the Ashbury Hotel while security tried not to make eye contact, I felt the first buzz on my wrist. At 7:17, the second. At 7:08, the third. By the time I reached the valet stand, I had 11 notifications. I opened the first one in the cold evening air. Incoming call, Raymond Ellis. Raymond was the bank officer who handled Whitmore's revolving credit facility. I let it ring once, twice. Then another notification pushed over it. Email sent successfully. Then another. Delivery confirmed. Now then another. Voicemail. I stood under the Ashbury stone awning with the city traffic hissing by on wet pavement, and for the first time that night, I smiled. Because inside that ballroom, my father still thought humiliation. He hadn't realized it the trigger. I didn't answer. I answered. It was Shirley from accounting, 71 years, chain smoker, precise, loyal to the company, never to vanity. Her first, sweetheart, what the hell did you send? Enough. A pause, her shuffling on her end. Then, very quietly, good. I got in my car but didn't start it. I could see the ballroom windows from the parking lot, glowing gold against the dark. Somewhere in there, my father was probably lifting a glass. Oh, assuring everyone the situation was handled. Maybe even making a joke about family being complicated. Then my phone lit up with Mason's name. Decline. My father. Decline. Dana. Decline. Another call came through from a trustee, Daniel Voss. I answered. Voss had been my grandfather's and one of the few men my father couldn't steamroll with volume. He sounded like he always did. Calm, dry, faintly irritated that the world required so much management. Callie, he said. Are you in physical? That questioned me everything. I'd seen enough already. No. Can you meet tonight? Yes. Bring whatever originals you have. I have duplicate. A beat of silence. Henry would have appreciated that. Then he hung up. I sat very still after that. My grandfather had been, but hearing his name in that tone almost knocked the breath out of me. Because if Voss was invoking him, that meant we were beyond family drama. We were in governance, control, survival. My father called again. This time I answered. He didn't say hello. What did you do? There are moments in life when fear burns off so clean, it feels like being cold. I said, you should have read the packet or you called me unstable. His breathing changed. Shorter, you vindictive little... Then voices in the background. Muffled. Urgent. Someone asking him who Mercer Growth Partners was. My father lowered his, "Where are you? Why?" "So we can handle this privately." I looked back at the ballroom for a chance to handle it privately. Then I hung up. He still didn't know the worst part. The trustees had gotten the fraud packet. The bank had gotten covenant evidence. But one more person had received a very different envelope. At 7:30 p.m. on the dot, Hollis Builders' chief operating officer got a package containing copies of altered pricing, internal emails, and proof that Mason had used their long-term contract numbers in a pitch deck to solicit unrelated financing for his own side venture. That wasn't just sloppy, it was radioactive. Hollis Builders represented nearly 18% of Whitmore's commercial revenue, and their COO, Elena Park, was not a woman you ever wanted asking your father for answers in writing. Within 20 minutes, she was. People always say they want the truth. What they really want is evidence they can point at. A screenshot, a timestamp, a forwarded voicemail of something hard enough to survive denial. That's why I didn't build my case around emotion. I built it around objects. Exhibit A was a series of Mercer invoices billed in round numbers. $28,000, $35,000, $40,000, because fake vendors are often too lazy to be irregular. Exhibit B was the LLC registration showing the condo address connected to Mason. Exhibit C was a reimbursement request from Dana's Design Incubator listing warehouse staging materials that had actually been used to renovate her home office. Exhibit D was a voicemail from my father, left at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, after I'd refused to reclassify an expense. "Move it out of discretion into launch. I don't care what bucket you use, Callie. Stop acting like an auditor and start acting like family." Exhibit E was a screen recording of the access rights memo with metadata showing the backdated edits. Exhibit F was the cleanest knife of all, a chain of internal messages proving Mason had approved payments to Mercer from his company-issued tablet while physically in Cabo during a strategy summit that didn't exist. I had 23 primary documents in the trustee packet and 41 support files in the archive, enough to suspend, enough to force testimony, enough to destroy the lie that I was just a resentful daughter lashing out. Around 8:10 p.m., I drove to Voss's office downtown. The building was mostly dark. His assistant had gone home, but he was there with one banker, one trustee from the family holding company, and, to my surprise, Shirley. She was still in gala makeup and had changed into sneakers. When I walked in, nobody asked if I was okay. That's how serious it was. Voss gestured to the conference table. "Start at Mercer." So I did. I didn't editorialize. I didn't cry. I didn't tell them my father had used the word unstable in public, or that Mason had filmed my humiliation like a child at the zoo. I gave them dates, payments, approvals, and gaps. November 14th, first Mercer invoice. December 3rd, unusual transfer to Dana Interiors Collective. January 22nd, duplicate event billing. March 2nd, access rights memo drafted. March 9th, backdated edits. March 28th, Hollis data misuse. Tonight, public retaliation after refusal to sign. The banker interrupted twice. Did your father certify this quarter personally?" "Yes." "Was this entity disclosed in annual review?" "No." His face went flat. That's the thing about numbers. They don't care who raised you. By 9:40 p.m., the bank officer had stepped out 3 times to take calls. Shirley had found 2 additional anomalies live in the ERP system. Voss had requested an emergency board session for 7 a.m. and instructed me not to delete, forward, or discuss anything beyond council and trustees. Then he said something I will never forget. "Callie, from this point forward, speak as an officer protecting the company, not as a daughter protecting herself." I understood what he meant. My father had dragged me into a family humiliation. If I wanted to win, I had to pull the story out of the family entirely and put it where he was weakest. Accountability. At 10:12 p.m., my father finally did what guilty men do when charm stops working. He begged. The message came in as a voicemail because I'd stopped answering unknown numbers, and he had apparently borrowed one. "Callie, don't do this. Whatever you think you found, we can fix it. You're upset. You're tired. Come home and we'll talk in the... Come home." I hadn't lived in his house in 12 years. That's how desperate he'd reverted to a version of me he thought he could still command. Then his voice hardened. "You force this? You don't understand how ugly it gets." No. He didn't understand how ugly it already was. The first public reversal didn't happen in a courtroom or on a front page. It happened in the employee parking lot at 6:40 the next morning. I pulled up to the Kingston Avenue flagship just as the sun was coming up over the building looked the same as it always had. Glass facade, brushed steel letters, rows of gleaming ranges and refrigerators lit like air around it was wrong. Tents suspended. Store manager clustered the side entrance, talking too quietly. When they saw me, they stopped. A year earlier, after a scene like the gala, they might have looked away. Not because they hate, because people protect themselves from fallout by pretending not to see. That morning, all three held my gaze. One of them, from installations who had worked with for 17, walked over and said, "Is it true about May Consulting?" I said, "Worse." He nodded once, not shocked, not disbelieving, just grimly vindicated, like a man whose bad suspicion finally got a name. Inside, the receptionist wasn't at her desk. HR was. Two lawyers, too. Shirley was carrying a banker's box, and my father's office. That alone told me the power had shifted, because in our company, his office door was never closed unless he wanted everyone to know he was inside. Closed meant he was being By 7:03 a.m., the emergency session began in the upstairs training room because it was the only space large enough and neutral enough to fit trustee, counsel, a bank representative, the outside auditor, and two board members who had driven in before dawn. My father came in 7 minutes late, furious and overgrown, on with Dana behind him in a cream blazer and Mason looking pale for the first time in his adult life. He saw me at the far end of the table and actually laughed, not kindly. "Of course she's here." Voss didn't even turn his head. "Mr. Whitmore, sit down." That's when I knew it was over for him. Not eventually, structurally. Men like my father survive on two things, deference and momentum. When both disappear, they start looking smaller in real time. He sat. For the next 2 hours, the room did not belong to charisma. It belonged to document. Each time my father tried to reframe, someone handed him paper. Each time Mason claimed ignorance, Shirley slid another timestamp across the table. When Dana said her design venture had nothing to do with company funds, the auditors matching invoice descriptions and warehouse issue logs. At one point, my father slammed his palm down and said, "This is an internal family matter." Elena Park from Hollis Builders was on speakerphone. She cut in immediately. "No, Richard, it became my matter when your son used our contract data in his financing deck." Room went. My father lay stunned, as if he'd forgotten other people existed beyond the ring. Then came the voicemail. Voss asked if the board wanted to hear the March 11th expense reclassification. My father said it was out of context. Voss played it anyway. His own filled the room. "Move it out of discretion into launch. I don't care what bucket you stop acting like an auditor and start acting like family." You could feel the shame move across the table like weather, not mine. Even Dana looked at him differently after that, like a woman noticing a crack in expensive glass. Then Voss opened the envelope my grandfather had left for succession disputes involving executive misconduct. I hadn't known he still had it. Apparently, my father hadn't either. Voss unfolded the letter and read exactly 3 paragraphs. That was all it took. My grandfather had written in his own that no Whitmore family relationship would ever outweigh employees, vendors, or the business itself. He named the trustees. He outlined emergency authority in the event of fraud, concealment, or retaliatory termination against any officer raising financial concern. Then came the line that the heir from my father's. "In such event, I instruct the trustees to remove Richard Whitmore immediately and place interim authority with the officer responsible for operational continuity." The officer responsible for operational continuity was not Mason. It was me. My father didn't even try to hide his panic then. He turned to me and said, "You set this up." There it was. Not denial. Recognition. I said, "No. Granddad set up a system. I just stopped protecting you from it." The vote happened at 9:21 a.m. 3 trustees are in favor of immediate suspension pending forensic review. 1 abstention. No support for my father. His executive privileges were revoked on the spot. Company accounts frozen from his authorization. Mason's access suspended pending investigation. Dana's vendor relationship terminated pending review. There was no dramatic gavel, no applause. Just paperwork placed in front of him and a keycard deactivation sliding across the table like a death certificate. My father stared at it for a full 5 seconds before pushing back from the table so hard his chair nearly tipped. "You can't do," Voss said. "It's already done." What I remember most is how ordinary the next sound was. A printer in the hallway is starting up. That's how empires actually die. Not with myth toner. He looked around the room and found compliance instead. Luis from installations wasn't. Neither were the showroom staff or the warehouse crew. But in that moment, I thought of all the people swallowed his temper and what it would mean for them to like anyone else. My father turned to me. "Say something." Mason, who'd spent a lifetime spending other people's credibility, said nothing. Then my father made his final mistake. He pointed at me and said, loud enough for the hallway to hear, "She's my daughter. Everything she has came from me." I stood up. "No," I said. "Everything I have survived you." That was the first time in my entire life he looked afraid of me. It still wasn't the payoff. The firing was only the beginning. Ruin takes shape in smaller, more public ways. At 10:08 a.m., he tried to go into his office to gather himself before employees could see him leave. His badge no longer worked. He swiped once, red light, twice, red light, 3 times, red light. The glass door stayed shut. And because God apparently has a sense of rhythm, the people closest enough to witness it were exactly the people he had always treated as scenery: reception, 2 warehouse leads, 1 appliance rep from Whirlpool, and the cleaning woman who came every Wednesday and knew more company secrets than the board ever would. No one laughed. That would have let him call it They just watched. That was worse. A lawyer opened the office for him and supervised while he packed. Not much in the end. A framed award, a leather portfolio, cufflinks in the top drawer, the bourbon glass he thought nobody knew, a family photo from 10 years ago where I was cropped at the edge, half out of frame even then. At 10:43, he walked out carrying his own box. No speech, no handshake, no farewell. Just the automatic opening onto bright morning light, and every employee pretending to work while seeing everything. By noon, word had spread to every location. Not rumors, facts, suspended, investigation, fraud concerns, client review. Interim authority, Callie Whitmore. The shift in tone was immediate. People who'd avoided me for months suddenly replied to emails in under. Managers sent me discrepancies they'd been too afraid to escalate under my father. One assistant forwarded a thread she'd buried out of fear, showing Mason pressuring her to alter calendar records. Another sent screenshots of Dana demanding product samples for her private design clients without billing codes. Once fear breaks, truth gets very fast. But the part that ruined my father wasn't just losing the title. It was what came next in public. Friday afternoon, the local Business Ledger online item. Whitmore Home and Kitchen announces interim leadership transition amid internal financial review. No names beyond former CEO Richard Whitmore placed on leave. That should have been Then someone leaked the gala video. Not the whole just 38 seconds. Enough to show my father on stage, accusing me of betrayal. Enough to show me standing calmly. Enough to catch my line. Should really check your email before dessert. It spread things always, not national, not virally, but locally, which is worse. In church parking, in booster club texts, in country club dining replier group chats, in the little web of respectable. It spent years mistaking my father's confidence for competent. Oh, everybody started asking the same question. If she were the thief, why was he the one suspended by morning? And once that question landed, all his old performances curdled. The charity photos looked staged. The Father of the Year act looked theatrical. The public grief at having to discipline his daughter looked exactly like what it was, a setup that exploded in him. Dana stopped coming to the showroom entirely. Mason posted a black square on social media, some quote about Storm's true character, then deleted it when former employees commented about Mercer Growth Partners under it. I wish I could tell you I was above enjoying that. I wasn't. I enjoyed every second. The cleanest payoff came 11 days later. By then, the forensic team had confirmed enough to make the suspension permanent. The bank had demanded revised disclosures. Hollis Builders had frozen new work until governance changes were complete, and the trustees had scheduled a formal leadership announcement at the Kingston showroom before opening. They asked if I wanted it private. I said no. If humiliation had been the weapon used on me, then visibility was part of the correction. At 8:30 a.m., managers from all 5 locations stood in the display corridor between the premium ranges and the built-in refrigeration wall. Not a glamorous stage, real company ground. The place where people sold, repaired, lifted, invoiced, and solved problems. The place my father had spent years using as a backdrop. I wore a navy suit and my mother's bracelet, not because I needed armor this time, because I wanted the reminder. The trustees spoke first, brief, controlled. They announced a governance restructuring, anti-retaliation protocols, an outside audit continuation, and new executive oversight. Then Daniel Voss read the final resolution. Richard Whitmore is hereby removed from all managerial, fiduciary, and representationals associated with Whitmore Home and Kitchen and its affiliated entity. Removed. Not retired, not stepping aside, not transition. Removed. I saw 2 veteran employees exchange a glance they'd probably waited a decade. Then Voss said, "Effective immediately, Callie Whitmore will serve as Chief Executive Officer." For one beat, the whole corridor was silent. I think some people expected me to cry or give a long speech about family, lesson, whatever polite language trying to disinfect something rotten. I didn't. I thanked the staff for keeping the company standing through instability. I promised clean books, transparent decisions, and no sacred cows. Then I told them something that made the room go very still. If anyone at this company has ever been told to stay quiet because the last name on the building mattered more than the truth, that policy is over. That was the line. You could feel people straighten, not out of loyalty to me, out of relief. Afterward, as employees dispersed, came up and shook my hand hard. Your dad used to say the company was family, he said. I looked around at the installers, warehouse crew, accounting, floor managers, designers, drivers. He was wrong, I said. Family was how he controlled it. This is work. We're going to do it honestly now. Luis smiled like a man seeing weather break. That should have been enough. It wasn't the most satisfying part. The most satisfying part happened outside. My father had shown up anyway. Of course he had. Some men cannot process the loss of an audience. They mistake refusal for invitation. He pulled into the front lot in his silver Mercedes at 9:04 a.m., probably believing he could still force a scene, maybe corner a trustee, maybe perform outrage for the staff and claw back some version of himself. But the staff had already heard the resolution, and the front doors had already been instructed not to. He got out of the car wearing sunglasses, carrying no box, just pure ego and habit, and strode toward the entrance. This was all a misunderstanding about parking. I was standing just inside the glass with Voss and two managers. He pulled. All locked. He rapped on the glass. Once, then harder. Every person in the front half of the showroom could see him. He pointed at me through the door and mouthed, "Open this." I didn't move. He banged on the glass again. People turned. Sales staff, a vendor rep, two customers browsing dishwashers, a driver wheeling in paperwork from the loading bay. He looked ridiculous. Powerful men always do when access dissipates before entitlement does. Finally, the security consultant stepped forward and opened the outer vestibule just enough to speak to him without letting him inside. My father started shouting. I couldn't hear every word through the glass, but I caught enough. My company. Defamation. She manipulated this. You can't lock me out. The consultant handed him an envelope. Final notice. No trespass. Council contact. My father snatched it, ripped it open, scanned the first page, and for the first time since this began, his anger broke cleanly into fear. Because removal is one thing, exile is another. He looked up at me through the glass. I walked forward then, close enough for him to hear through the cracked vestibule gap. You taught me that whoever controls the building controls the story, I said. You don't control either anymore. His face went gray in a way I had never seen before. Not rage, not arrogance, not performance. Loss, real loss. He had spent 20 years treating the company like a stage set built to magnify him. And now, he was outside it, reduced to a man in expensive shoes, holding he couldn't intimidate into changing. The consultant closed the vestibule. My father stood there another 10 seconds. Oh, maybe hoping I'd come running after him the way I always used to when he withdrew affection or approval. Then he turned, got back in the Mercedes and drove away, slow enough for everyone to understand he had nowhere urgent left to be. That still wasn't because public loss spreads into private life faster than people think. Within a month, Dana's Interiors Inc. was shut down, quietly. Her website vanished first, then her social posts, then the office. Mason's condo went on the market. After the payments were clawed back, collapsed. One of his friends sent me a screenshot of him trying to pitch independent brand consulting on LinkedIn, like the entire hadn't earned how he'd funded the first. The country club did not renew my father's board seat. The church elder who used to praise him from the pulpit stopped returning his calls. Two suppliers switched to written-only communication with him after the compliance notices. And the thing that would have hurt him most of all, employees stopped lowering their voices when they said his name. He became a cautionary story, not a patriarch, not a founder, not a legend, a story. Don't let it turn into another Richard situation. Do you know what that does to a man who built himself out of reputation? Hearing his name become shorthand for rot, ruin? People always imagine revenge as one loud cinematic slam. But the truth is, the most satisfying aftermath is it's permanent. We changed signature in the bank accounts, revised authority levels, cleaned vendor files, made raises. It brought in an outside ethics channel, rebuilt trust one unglamorous correction at a time. I rehired a warehouse supervisor my father had forced out for disloyal energy, which turned out to mean he'd once questioned a rush order. I promoted Shirley into a formal compliance role she should have had 15. I ended Mason's pet branding projects and used the budget to replace 2 delivery trucks with brakes that didn't sound like they were dying. Employees started staying after me to talk, not because they were scared, but because they believed answers existed now. The commercial team won back Hollis Builders after 6 brutal weeks and a humiliating amount of transparency. Elena Park told me over coffee, I didn't come back because your family. I came back because you sent proof before excuses. That may have been the nicest thing anyone said to me. As for my father, he tried 3 different approaches weeks after the removal. First came rage, threats through lawyers, bluster about wrongful claims that I had coordinated. Then came sentiment, emails with subject lines like "this as a family." One voice message, he actually said, "I know I wasn't perfect for the business." That was the problem. He still thought, though. Then came lonely. I know. As one rainy Thursday, 2 months after the gala, I found him sitting in his across from warehouse my grandfather had started it, just sitting there, engine on, hands on the, looking at the old brick building. It might explain where he had gone wrong. I didn't stop. Some stories don't need one last conversation. And for anyone wondering whether ruining him ruined me too, the answer is no. It revealed me. That's different. Because once the panic passed, I realized something I should have understood years earlier. I had never actually needed my father's ability to run that company. I had needed him out of the way. All those years I thought I was asking for recognition. I was really asking for obstruction. Once it did, the decisions became air inside the building even felt different. Like someone had opened windows in a house that had been shut to. Was I sad? Of course. You don't go to war with your own blood without grief. But grief isn't the same thing as regret. I regretted the years I let him make me feel small. I regretted every meeting where I softened the truth to protect his. I regretted mistaking endurance for loyalty. I did not regret the packet. I did not regret the vote. I did not regret the locked door. And I definitely did not regret the moment his own keycard blinked red in front of the people he thought were, because that moment wasn't cruel, it was accurate. My father had spent decades teaching everyone around him that power meant never being the one left outside. Then he taught me one more useful thing, exactly where to close the. He thought the family business, his birthright, was just the daughter who kept it tidy. Now his name is the one on the